Thanks, Kevin, for that very nice introduction. It's good to be back in Austin. So I thought I would start by talking a little bit about where I practice, because I think that has a major influence on how you think and how you're constrained as an architect, and whether you know it or not, it really influences your work. So understanding the cultural code of a city, I think, is a necessary precondition to making contributions to that city. So if we're talking about Chicago, I would argue that there's an underlying pragmatism which defines Chicago's fundamental character. And I think it has something to do with the types of industries that call it home, insurance, financial services, and so on. But I would further argue that the architects who have succeeded in Chicago, from the early Chicago School architects through Mies van der Rohe to the present day, were architects that could kind of grasp this fundamental cultural condition, but at the same time were able to transcend it, to kind of take this pragmatism and turn it into poetry. So Chicago's always been this kind of tough, no-nonsense place which values hard work, and I think you see this reflected in the architectural production. So if I asked you to name, what is the quintessential Chicago building? Perhaps something like the early Chicago School buildings might come to mind. Maybe the Monadnock building. Perhaps Carson Peary Scott or the Reliance building. 860 Lakeshore Drive or Marina City. A couple of my personal favorites, the Cook County Correctional Facility or Crown Hall. Or perhaps one of the three tall commercial buildings in town, the Hancock Building, the Willis Tower, or the Aon Center, not coincidentally all named for insurance companies. So what do all these structures have in common? First of all, you might notice that they're ordinary building types, office buildings, apartment buildings, schools, jails. While other cities are known for their museums, cultural buildings, monuments, I would argue that this is not the case in Chicago. Chicago's reputation rests upon building types that you would find in any city. Secondly, you'll notice that there's a certain straightforward, no-nonsense, yet dignified quality to these buildings, even the jail. So viewed on one level, they're all very practical, functional structures, but they've transcended this condition to become kind of iconic of the place and reflective of its values. So I think if you're trying to, in this, I'm talking about Chicago, but I think this really goes for any place that you choose to settle after you graduate. If you aspire to contribute, I think understanding the underlying conditions that created what you're seeing has to inform what you're doing, just as understanding the soil conditions of a building is a precondition to designing a structure on top of it. So I see my practice as really part of this cultural continuum, and in my work I endeavor to strive for some of the same qualities, searching for this kind of transcendent quality, but within the pragmatic. So this is, as an example, this is a project about 8 years ago. The city came to me and asked me what to do with the old post office. So the old post office is a long vacant, kind of a white elephant of a building. It's about 3 million square feet enclosed, and a relic of a time when Chicago was the mail order capital of the United States, with Sears and Montgomery Ward shipping catalogs out of the site, essentially a large storage facility. So I propose that it be converted to a municipal mausoleum, perhaps out of which a poetic place-specific ritual might arise, in which funeral barges would float down the Chicago River to the site, like in Berklin's famous painting. The funeral cortege could disembark and ramp up to the building entrance. A copper-clad building extension would reorient the building towards the river. Ascending the ramp, you'd arrive at these tall, rusted steel doors, and upon opening, there would be a large remembrance hall. Of course, the old post office lobby, but this time lined on one side with funeral chapels. A typical floor above would pragmatically accommodate 90,000 crypts and niches per floor, each with a stone plaque and reliquary for artifacts that would tell the story of that person's life. The crypt walls, when viewed straight on, would speak to the individual, but when viewed obliquely would dissolve into a single reflective plane symbolizing communality in the greater whole. The raised roadway passing through the building would recast the entire structure as a kind of memento mori for loop commuters. Chicago's notable pragmatic kind of visionaries was Gary Comer, the founder of the Land's End Company, who I had the good fortune to work with. One day he was taking a trip down memory lane to the neighborhood where he grew up and found that it had fallen into decline, was being plagued by poverty, drugs, street gangs, and so forth. He decided to do something about it and started in the local elementary school, where he met a man named Arthur Robertson, who ran the South Shore Drill Team, which was a popular youth performance group, which was having a very positive impact on the community and constituted one of its few success stories. So Gary decided to build on the success and build these guys kind of a dedicated practice and performance space. So what started out as a gym quickly expanded into what became the youth center, which is a youth recreation and education facility to provide a constructive environment for kids to spend their after-school hours. The building program was in constant flux throughout the planning. Gary would call daily and change the programs or change the partners. So we settled on a scheme which was more well-defined. The more well-defined spaces would occupy the center here, and then around it would be these programmatically indeterminate bars where we could kind of plug programs in over time, over the course of design, over the course of construction, and then on into perpetuity, so that the building could evolve with the community and adapt to the changing needs over time. Outdoor spaces would be adaptive too. The parking lot would support drill team practice and community events. The design is predicated on an idea of spatial layering, so which would enable the user to experience multiple spaces and activities simultaneously. For example, standing in the cafe, looking through the gym to the parking lot outside, or in the gym looking through the cafe up to the rec room on the second floor above. At the heart of the facility was this practice space that converts to a theater for the drill team shows and other community events via telescoping seating, moving walls and ceiling panels. So these wall panels open up, the ceiling opens up to reveal theater lighting and so forth. And then 625 theater seats compressed into the 6-foot wall on one side of the space that you see behind the girls there. This is that space in performance mode. On the second level, educational and recreational space wrap the performance space. So you have rec rooms, music rooms, so forth. This is a view of the art and dance rooms. On the third level, exhibition and classroom spaces surround a large roof garden. Gary asked for a green roof, so we interpreted this as kind of an outdoor horticultural classroom where the kids could plant. It had 2 feet of soil, so we could plant anything up there, even a small tree. So children would grow and harvest food crops, which would then be used in cooking classes in the teaching kitchen on the ground floor. Round skylights in the garden bring natural light down into the gym and cafe below to create this kind of bright and airy interior. One of the kind of strange requests when we first sat down with the drill team was that they wanted no windows in the building. There were too many drive-by shootings. Windows cause problems. So this was presented a challenge because we had imagined this very light and airy atmosphere where kids would want to be there. So to sort of solve that problem, most of the natural light in the building enters through the roof and only selectively through the facade, which is clad in these brightly colored cement panels, which refer back to the drill team colorful flags and uniforms of the drill team. So these are little windows spaced in there. The variegated pattern was really intended to animate what was really a long, largely window-free facade, but also a defensive measure against graffiti. So if the building got graffitied, we could pop in a new panel and you wouldn't notice that the panels had changed. Where we did have large expanses of glass, we used bulletproof glazing. So this is all bulletproof glazing in the north-facing art room. At night, the pattern reverses and the building takes on a more theatrical quality. Several years later, we designed a charter school just north of the youth center to form a campus with it and leverage the space for daytime uses. The existing metal fence that you see here became integrated with the facade. So this is an existing fence that protected the drill team practice area. That comes up and becomes the facade and wraps around the building on 3 sides. There's a large glass enclosed lobby space which looks back towards the drill center here. An important factor here is these kids that go to a charter school in this neighborhood in Chicago would be seen as targets of the other kids. So we created this little plaza, which the kids came to call the Quad, and a big kind of gate opens here and allows the kids to kind of congregate here inside the site rather than outside on the street there. So the stainless steel cladding gives the building a very lightweight but secure quality for a neighborhood that was still troubled by gangs and violence. The cladding strategy, we didn't have the money to do bulletproof glass in this project. This was maybe half the budget of the youth center. So we leveraged an optical effect in which we put the corrugated stainless siding over the window, so it's very easy to see outside from inside during the daytime, but very hard to see outside in while school is in session. Buildings primarily classrooms surrounding kind of a core with offices and so forth, and then the students travel back and forth to the youth center for their enrichment classes, to go to gym, lunch, and so forth. The classroom walls have glass walls on the corridor to reinforce the school's sort of ethos of transparency and accountability. So, and then linear skylights run the length of the building on two sides. So here you can see in the section, we get light from two sides in every room. So the daylight comes in through the skylight and then through the glass of the corridor, but then you're also getting it from outside. And then we pull the second floor back so that light penetrates down to the ground floor here, and so that the ground floor classrooms can get light from both sides as well. And then we design graphics and so forth throughout the building to kind of reinforce this, the school's culture and college emphasis and so forth. The way I describe my work is I say it's about relationships, not form. And what I mean is that, by that, is that an architecture that needs to be experienced to be understood, primarily about materiality and space and how one moves through it, and less about shape or image or form of the building. It also means something that seeks to establish relationships with things outside of itself and acknowledges that it's part of a greater whole. But this approach runs counter to the grain of popular culture, obsessed with the self, and this evidence is all around us, from the selfie stick to the iPhone. Tattoos, not just for sailors and hookers anymore, as anyone from Austin knows. All point to a culture which places high value on self-expression and demands to be entertained all the time. Few fields of endeavor are immune to the influence, and architecture isn't one of them. Skylines are becoming crowded collections of self-referential object buildings which seek no relationships other than with their author's ego. A world full of loud rhetoric but no message, where all is possible but little has meaning. As designers, I think we need to ask ourselves, what do we leave society when the novelty of form is worn off? Once upon a time, people started magazines about things larger than themselves. Poetry magazine was started in 1912 in Chicago by a woman named Harriet Monroe, who sought to put the best poetry in front of the widest audience. Some 90 years later, a gift from an heiress enabled the magazine to start a foundation, which in turn decided to build a home for poetry. The home would include a library, gallery, performance space, and offices for the magazine, but one of the unusual requirements was that of a garden, which would become a point of departure for the design. And so we started by looking at different ways of integrating a garden with a building through strategies of knotting, overlapping, interlocking, and then these strategies were then tested with site-specific study models, some of which you see in that inset photo. The direction that emerged was that of a garden created through erosion of an implied volume described by the boundary of the site, which was L-shaped in plan. This boundary would be defined physically in such a way that the garden becomes another room of the building, and the project's spatial narrative, rather than its form, becomes its defining aspect. The building would not be understood all at once, but something that unfolds slowly, space by space, almost like a poem which unfolds line by line. In the sketch, you can kind of see the idea of this kind of garden coming into focus with the public spaces surrounding it and kind of looking into it. The building is conceived as a series of spatial layers defined by materials that visitors move through and between, A ribbon of wood bookshelves snakes through the building, starting in the library and then continuing to the other end of the performance space. A layer of glass and then moves in and out to interlock the inside with the outside, allowing daylight in and views out. The garden would be defined as a hardscape plane that would extend inside the building so that the ground floor public spaces would feel that they too were part of the garden. Finally, the outermost layer is a thin layer of oxidized zinc enclosing the ensemble and becoming veil-like at the garden to allow views in from the street. These are some early models which show that kind of screen quality and how the garden is sort of this mediator between the city and the building interior. The building sits on this L-shaped site. It's sort of deeper at the west end, shallower. There's an alley that runs behind it, and then two main streets here, surrounded by tall condominium buildings. This is a view from across the street as you sort of glimpse into the garden. Another view from across the street as you sort of move toward the building. You come to these steps, so the garden is kind of this gently raised platform, so there's this sense of removal that you're kind of stepping out of the city and into this new world. The public programs are located on the ground floor, so here's the steps here. One enters here, moves through this more compressed space out into the garden proper. The front door is here. We have library, we have performance space where the poetry readings are held, and they're connected by a gallery with kind of changing exhibits related to poetry. Upon entering the garden, you encounter this tribute to Ruth Lilly, who is the heiress, without whose generosity the building wouldn't be possible. And then you kind of enter this more compressed zone that leads towards the garden and then pop out into the garden. So as you pop out into the garden, you see this bookshelf come into view, the library comes into view, announcing that you're entering this literary environment. This kind of outdoor space is intended as sort of an urban sanctuary, a place where you can be in the city but remove from it at the same time to kind of strip away the distractions of modern life. The hardscape surface of the garden continues on into the building and the ground floor areas, suggesting that these two are part of the garden. We spent months developing the mix of the concrete. So we starting with the stones, looking at different aggregates, and then looking at the different ingredients, testing out different cements and sands. And then once we had the mix, we tried different sandblasting techniques and then built a full-size model. So I'm a big fan of mock-ups and models. This is about a 10 by 12 mock-up, which contains every condition that we would encounter when building that garden slab, because concrete is a bit unforgiving. You really get one chance to get it right? So the approach to the whole project in terms of materials was to really take ordinary materials and then transform them in some way to make them special or strange, analogous maybe to the way a poet works with words, right? So poets don't invent words. They arrange them in a way that uncovers new meaning or challenges your preconceptions, and this is how I see the role of the architect in a similar way. So this is the west end of the ground floor. There's a double height library that holds 35,000 volumes. When you get into the library, there's sort of three walls of wood and then views out into the garden. This is the wrapping bookshelves. They're made of Baltic birch plywood, very kind of humble material, and that gravel trench marks the edge, the inboard edge of that garden plane. A layer of glass weaves in and out to interlock the ground floor spaces. It's a unitized glass wall that spans all the way from the foundation up to the roof, 36 feet. This is the exhibition gallery that connects the library to the performance space, past a tribute of Harriet Monroe, and then you come into the performance space, and so the poetry readings take place against the backdrop of the garden. And so I wanted this to be an urban space. I feel you're kind of at a poetry reading in the city. So you can look out of this room through the glass, and you're just steps away from the street. You can see cars going by and so forth. So we had to isolate the outside noise. So there's three layers of glass there. There's two in that aluminum frame system, and then there's a 3/4 inch monolithic layer about 2 feet inboard of that, and that isolates all the outside noise. So a police car can go by outside and you won't hear it. This is the main stair. It wraps around this bamboo garden that was intended to kind of pull the garden inside. Reed Hildebrand of Cambridge was the landscape architect we worked with on the plannings on this project. As you go around this kind of bamboo, there's the open door policy, which is the editorial policy of the magazine. And then this is a view from the second floor looking back towards the garden. And you get the sense of this garden as sort of an outdoor room, another room of the building. This is the snaking bookshelf through the second floor. This is looking simultaneously down into the gallery on the right side and then down into the garden on the left. And then this is kind of two photos that show how the different opposite ends of the building kind of regard each other through this garden space. These are some early conceptual studies of the screen wall. There were maybe 50 of these, I want to say. It was very, it's a very delicate thing. Some of them looked too fence-like. Some of them sent the wrong message. Some of them said keep out. So it was, we did a lot of testing before settling on the perforated metal, and then developed it more in the supports in kind of a digital drawings and calculations and so forth. And then we built another mock-up. This one was 12 feet wide and 36 feet tall, and you can see we're still kind of testing out different support structures here. So we're still kind of tinkering with the details. On the right is this moment when the oxidized zinc goes from continuous to perforated at the garden to allow views inside. And the idea was when you're approaching this building, you would come up to it and it would look very kind of monolithic and solid from far away when viewed obliquely. But then when you come up close to it, it sort of opens up and it reveals itself, let's say. And the black color, that oxidized zinc was to make it the corrugated metal kind of sort of strange in an urban environment. It's sort of an ordinary material, but kind of very strange in an urban environment. And there were a couple connotations that I was interested in, kind of this notion of authority, because Poetry Magazine is the authority of poetry in the English language. So if you think about judges wearing black clothes or a black belt in karate, but it also connotes the sort of the mysterious and enigmatic, which I thought a building for poetry should have. So the screen changes throughout the day. So on the top is sort of during the early morning, and then as the sun goes down, the layers start to change. So some of the more dominant layers become recessive and vice versa, and then at night, the screen dissolves completely, entirely, and you're kind of allows your view into the building, kind of your eye stopping at all these different planes through this layered facade. I'm very interested in these kinds of urban spaces, which are both inside and outside at the same time. And I guess if I had one wish for Chicago, it would be for a more spatially rich public realm, which is kind of binary right now. So you're either outside or inside. This is a high-rise office tower project we're currently working on that's going under construction this month in the Loop. And the base of the building is basically a spec office building. It's not much to talk about from here up. It's kind of market-driven. But at the bottom, the base is carved away. So we have an existing park across the street. We carve away the base and create this public park that's slightly raised into the lobby here. And then on the second floor, there's another outdoor space. So from Wacker Drive, which is way over here, one can see all the way through this arcade, through that park, through this park, into the lobby, through the lobby here, and then there's a green wall on the adjacent parking garage there. So this is kind of a conceptual drawing, sort of showing how the base of the building is kind of quarried out to create this public realm, which can then be inhabited. So there'll be kind of a cafe here, and then people kind of hanging out. And the idea of on these first two floors is to create spaces which support the new ways people are working. They're not working in cubicles 9 to 5 anymore, but it gives, they can come down, have a meeting, check their email and so forth, sit on a laptop. This is that space on the second floor. It's kind of more Zen-like, kind of a shade, mossy garden with a gravel floor. A nice place to come at the end of the day. This is a proposal for a conference center at the University of Chicago that proposes a similar kind of layered spatial condition. Our goal was to create something authentic, right? So something that was site and culture specific to the university. We said we were competing against architects from other countries, and a couple from, one from Paris and two from New York, and and the campus there is becoming kind of a collection of sort of a menagerie of kind of not so great buildings by famous architects. So they hire these very famous architects, but they're not getting their best work, and the buildings could really be picked up and put anywhere. So kind of our goal was to create something that would be more, they wanted something iconic, but something, how do you do an icon that is sort of culture specific, site specific? So this is the site plan here. This is the Midway. This is the University of Chicago. This is the South Campus here. There's a Midway that runs through here that was put in at the World's Fair in the 1890s. At our site, this is our site here. There's a weird kind of subtle shift in the road here. So we kind of took the building and torqued it a little bit, so it's sort of an angular facade that aims back at the main landmark building on campus, which is this one here. It's hard to see that. Visitors approach the building from the north through that kind of bosque of trees here. And then you can see the shift in the road here. So here's this sort of shift that angles that front facade and sort of torques the building slightly. Emerging from under those trees, the building would rise up, a large angular red stone with irregular carved openings, reflecting a variety of meeting rooms inside. Steps at the property edge would lead you up to this porch that you see here. So this is kind of a covered arcade. There's a glass wall here, so you're looking into the lobby, which they consider kind of the living room of the university. And this kind of wood-covered, wood-ceilinged arcade. So we were trying to reference the historical spatial types of the campus that you can see there in the inset photo. Once inside, the visitors would enter this tall space with its sunken lounge and built-in seating and fireplace and a bar. And then the stair would take you up to the second floor to the south-facing lounge on the mezzanine level with a more casual, club-like atmosphere that looks out over this large outdoor retreat space surrounded by trees. So the kind of vegetation sort of creating this outdoor room in dialogue with this interior space of the building. Meeting rooms of various shapes and sizes on the floors above. They sort of frame these views of campus, and then at the very top of the building there was this roof deck, a large ivy-covered terrace culminating the whole sort of vertical experience with dramatic views of the campus. These are some early massing studies of that project, and then later development. You can see the irregular openings hint at sort of the number and variety of the meeting spaces inside. We didn't want it to look like a dorm. We didn't want it to look like a library. What should a conference center look like, right? In order to meet, there's very stringent performance standards that we had to meet for this project. So we had a target value of about 40% glazing in this envelope. And then inside on this envelope, there would be kind of sprinkled throughout the building these little outdoor terraces, which were ivy covered. And then over time, the idea was that ivy would sort of come out, not from the ground up, but outward from these terraces and eventually cover the whole building, kind of integrating it with the other buildings on campus. This is our entry into the Guggenheim Helsinki Art Museum project, which is located in an industrial harbor site. So like the previous project, the challenge here is how do you create something that is place-specific and culture-specific in this age of global practice. You have architects in Chicago practicing all over the world. You have people from all over the world coming to Chicago. How do you do something that is site and culture-specific, that can't just be picked up and moved around the globe? So we attempted this by drawing inspiration from nature, but also from traditional Swedish, or Finnish rather, building materials. This is kind of urbanistically, we created this large plaza for events in front of the building, and then this monumental stair leading up to the building, and then a connection to an existing park at the opposite end. The site is sort of an industrial kind of port area. It's kind of a cruise ship embarking area. The design of the building is inspired by the cellular structure of indigenous wood. which informs the organizational structure you see here of gallery spaces. So these are these kind of flexible galleries, and then these multi-purpose zones that were part of the program. The round elements are these kind of multi-purpose rooms enclosed in 2 layers of bent glass with curtains in between to kind of modify, so you can modify and control the light coming in to the building. The structure and cladding is informed by lumber industry practices. We did research on how lumber is dried and stacked and so forth. You can see on the inset photo. So these innumerable wood elements would be stacked like lumber in piles, yielding a structure which is elemental and direct, as if unloaded from a boat and stacked on the harbor side. This is the layered tectonic of the main gallery walls. So you can see the piers here. The main gallery walls are almost like beams spanning from piles, and then you can see how the roof spans to those gallery walls. Air distribution, the walls are hollow, so air distribution would happen inside of these walls, and also, electrical and data and so forth would happen there as well. One edge of the site is curved, sort of this kind of gentle sweeping curve, so we just stacked the boards in an orthogonal way according to the rest of the plan, but left this staggered pattern, giving that wall sort of a unique texture. And then the idea was that would form ledges where snow would collect in the wintertime, sort of changing the quality of the building in a seasonal way. Maybe the ultimate testing ground for something that's pragmatic and transcendent is the Mies campus at IIT, where we're doing this innovation center to support interdisciplinary coursework, and the Institute of Design. So it's located in the middle of campus to draw faculty and students from all the different departments. So just to get you situated here, here's Crown Hall, here's the Koolhaas building here. This is the new site for the Innovation Center. This is Mies's master plan from 1941. This is our site here. Mies planned the building on a 24 by 24 foot grid, which we adopted after some testing. And so the building is kind of conceived as a hybrid of campus space and building, because all the buildings on campus are basically the property are owned by a certain department. This one is owned by nobody and everybody. So it's actually more like the campus itself. So it's really more like this than like one of these. So it's sort of the concept is sort of a hybrid of building and campus. We'd have these, it would be organized around these 2 open air courtyards that would serve as meeting spaces but bring light deep into the floor plate. So circulation inside the building is indirect and dispersed, designed to promote collaboration and interaction. The courtyards are linked externally, so one could step up sort of Farnsworth-like onto this platform into the courtyard, up the stair that's connected to the other courtyard out. So one can walk through the entire project without ever actually entering the building. The building provides flexibly adaptive space. This is the 2nd floor. This is where the Institute of Design will be. So there's kind of studios, there's classrooms, there's project rooms, there's faculty offices, and then these open spaces are all kind of flexible learning environments. This is this sort of terrace that's connects the 2 courtyards outside. This is the ground floor, so the main level is kind of a collision zone where these different building users cross paths with a cafe, event center, large tribune stair for lectures. The lower level is where the shop is, so you have undergraduate design studios here, coding cave here, classrooms, breakout rooms, a shop assembly area shop down here. So you pass by this and this before you enter the building, so you can kind of see students working in different modes, which you can see in this rendering here. So this is approaching from the south. I'm looking into that studio, which is located here in the section, and then the shop is sort of over here. So the 2nd floor of the building cantilevers over the ground floor to provide sun shading for the ground floor, and then there's this ETFE facade, which is actually a dynamic facade. It actually moves, and we can vary the amount of solar energy entering the building through sophisticated pneumatics. So we can adapt, the building can adapt to climate in real time, which I'll explain in a minute. So this is the ETFE. You may have seen this material before in sports stadiums. It's 95% transparent. There's a couple of views of the model there. This is a section here. So this is grade here. The lower, undergrad studios are about 6 feet below grade. There's a big 12-foot clear story here. This is the second floor here. There's a reflective, kind of mirror reflective soffit panel here. So students walking along the main pedestrian drag can look up and see reflected in it the students working inside the building. And then this is the ETFE facade, which I'll describe in a minute. Building systems are advanced as well. So we have a radiant deck system. So what this is basically it's a corrugated metal deck with concrete in it, but tubing that runs in the concrete that's filled with hot and cold water that transforms the metal deck to a radiant panel. So we're using the structure to heat and cool the building. This shows the kind of dynamic facade. So the idea of this foil, this ETFE has 3 layers. So there's the two inner layer and outer layer are stationary, and then there's an intermediate layer which can be moved back and forth, right? So by filling these cavities with air, we can move that inner foil back and forth. So the outer layer has a frit on it. There's a corresponding frit to the middle layer, and then as we bring those together, we decrease the amount of solar energy coming into the building. So we can tie this to a building automation system, which can be tied to a weather station, so the building can automatically open and close. So in the east, when the sun is in the east, the building closes down, closes up, and then as the sun moves around the sky, the east side opens up, the south side starts to close, and so forth. So this is a little diagram of how these cushions are filled. This is a plan view down here. So you can see the inner space here, the outer, and then this layer is the one that moves back and forth. Another advantage of this material is that it can span very large distances. So these are some of the early studies. This is where we ended up. The ETFE foil is 1% the weight of glass and gives the building this kind of light, cloud-like appearance. At IIT, the corner is a particularly important detail. So we didn't want a kind of a dark, shadowy corner. We wanted it to appear very light. So what we have, this is a plan detail at the corner. There's a laminated glass fin with sort of a curved edge here around which that ETFE foil turns as it makes its turn around the corner. So at night, the building kind of takes on this sort of lantern-like effect. It's one of the few 24/7 buildings on campus. I'm going to close with a couple smaller projects. This one's a single-family house in Michigan whose material palette was inspired by its site on the lakefront of Lake Michigan. So this Lake Michigan here, this is the site. There's a street side here, a long driveway. The house looks here over the lake. This is all sand. We're using this Soshugiban siding that actually comes from Austin, Texas, to kind of reference these sort of bonfires that happen in these areas. The home's organized around a series of 4 open-air courtyards. So it's basically a square. We divide that into zones and then create these 4 open-air courtyards that you see in the model here. This is sort of an entry courtyard here. This is a dining courtyard off the kitchen. This is a beach entrance. And then this is a deck looking out over the lake. Here you can see this sort of, you enter through this entry courtyard. This is sort of a bridge here going over a reflecting pool into the house. This is a big kind of living, dining, kitchen space that leads out to this outdoor dining courtyard here. Master suite next to the deck that looks out at the lake. Beach entrance. This is sort of a service zone with mudroom, powder room, and so forth, and then a study that converts to a guest bedroom. This is a section through that main living space, and then some views out to the lake there. I'd like to close with this last tiny project, which is an installation at the Chicago Biennial. So currently there's a architecture biennial going on in Chicago up until January 3rd. And it's located, this piece is located outside on the South Plaza of the Cultural Center, which is the building where the biennial is being hosted. And we call it the Leaf Lounge. It uses the existing south facade of the Cultural Center to create a space bordered on 3 sides with a 6-foot-tall wall of leaves. So here's the Cultural Center here. This is an entrance here. So there's a 6-foot-tall wall of kind of wire baskets with leaves in them here. The idea is to kind of create another urban layer, another layer of the building, and claim a small slice of urban space for social engagement during this kind of 3-month event. These are some mock-ups and tests we did. So we built a mock-up on the roof of our office. So this is the gabions. We studied how the leaves would settle over time. And then this is the material that we would put in. These are the seating would be ash trees that are all the ash trees in Chicago are dying. They're succumbing to the emerald ash borer, an invasive insect. So they'll all be gone in about 3 years. The city's taking these down. We would use that material. But the project's an appeal to shared human senses, which searches for a new public realm hiding in plain sight. It employs ordinary materials and economy of means. It's site-specific and respectful of the established urban grid. It seeks to establish relationships with things outside of itself, acknowledging that it's part of a greater whole, and proposing an alternative to the architecture of self-expression. Thank you for attending.